So thanks to TP-Link for providing me with the Deco X90 and for sponsoring a portion of this video.
All right, let's see just how good this thing is.
Finally. So you've likely seen, say, a few videos at this point talking about the new line of M1 MacBook Pros with the M1 Pro, M1 Max on it. And most of the videos, from what I'm seeing, are focusing on raw benchmark scores. And that's great for those who sort of understand on a deeper level what those scores mean, and there's definitely a place for those. But I think there's a lot of people out there who are left wondering how those scores translate to their specific use case and workflow. That's why we're here. That's what I'm about. And that's what I want to show you with this new line of MacBook Pros and help you guys understand which version of these computers is right for you in the real world. And because there's a lot of variance in the sort of M1 world, we've got experiences with most of the computers inside of that world. So we're gonna be talking about my experience with my base 14-inch M1 Pro. We're gonna bring in Robert Rosenfeld from the Apple Circle, talk about his just fully spec'd out 14-inch M1 Max, and also try to answer the big question: if you already have an M1 machine, maybe you've got a MacBook Air like I was upgrading from, or an M1 MacBook Pro, is this even worth considering? All right, so personally, as far as the daily machine that I use, I'm using the base 14-inch M1 Pro. I had been coming from a regular M1 MacBook Air that I loved, and for the things that I did, that machine was great. Size, it was lightning fast, any task I threw at it, daily stuff like watching content, email, script writing, browsing, whatever was a breeze. It handled light editing using Lightroom, Photoshop, Final Cut. I never felt like it had any slowdowns. I did want to try the new generation so I could share my experiences with it. I didn't need it. I probably could have waited on it. Apple did offer pretty nice incentives for trade-ins for my MacBook Air, so I decided to jump in. And again, that MacBook Air had worked well for that past year, but the biggest thing I was excited about was getting rid of just those two ports. And that was, for me, one of the most annoying things about the computer. Certainly dongles made it easier, and it was more of a minor inconvenience. But the additional ports on the new MacBook Pro models were a really big reason for me to upgrade to the base 14-inch M1 Pro. And now there are performance boosts, obviously, from the M1 to the M1 Pro. Personally, the additional performance benefits of the M1 Pro chip weren't really that meaningful for what I was doing. I really wanted the ports, and even if that was just the only difference between these two, I don't think I would have regretted making that upgrade. And I totally understand, let's call it irony, of Apple taking away ports and then selling us back the solution. But it was a solution that I wanted. The big one for me was having an SD card reader built into the computer. There's been a lot of times where I'm traveling, I'm recording audio on SDs, I can't find my dongle. I've had adapters break, and I've had no way to get that footage or that audio file from the card to my computer. I wanted to be done with that. So being able to have an SD card reader in a Mac was absolutely awesome. But after opening it up and messing around with it for a while, I found that I love it for way more than just damn extra ports. So first of all, the screen is incredible. ProMotion is an amazing feature to have, and to finally have it on an Apple laptop is great. HDR looks amazing. The liquid Retina XDR display just is beautiful as you'd expect. That wonderfulness of seeing things smoothly scroll, it's a bad thing to say, I guess, because I've been such on my high horse about high refresh rates on phones. Kind of stopped noticing the high refresh rate on the display. When I went back and looked at older laptops like that, my old Air, I could definitely notice a difference when they were side by side, but like, how often are you going to have them side by side? It's a beautiful display, and I noticed it for a while, but then it just became my laptop screen. What I do notice, and what does not look incredible to me, is that notch. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. It's hideous and ridiculously large, and your mind will eventually block it out. There are apps that can sort of make it sort of appear black all around it. A few hours of using it, like, I kind of faded in the background, But then I'm reminded that it's there, and I think Apple is clearly laying the roadmap for eventual Face ID to be included there, but like a big chunky notch on a laptop that doesn't have facial ID makes no sense. Same argument I made sort of a few years ago when Android phones were putting just notches on things for the heck of it that didn't have any facial unlock. It made no sense then. It made very little sense now. I would have preferred even a camera that kind of shoots up at your nose that's built into the keyboard or the function keys to have that notch go away, or just even a bigger bezel on top. But notch be gone. I think for me that is definitely the most aesthetically ugly part of this computer. Despite that though, and if you could take that aside, I think generally it's a pretty beautiful machine. It reminds me, if you can see these or ever had one, the old PowerBooks. So the thickness doesn't bother me. One thing that I wasn't expecting to fall in love with is how fast Touch ID is on this generation. On my MacBook Air, it was good. This time it is like instantaneous and works almost all the time. I have a problem. My fingertips get really dry. So fingerprint readers don't always work that well for me, especially on phones. But despite my dry old fingers, this has worked really well. I also didn't expect to appreciate the speakers here. They are really improved, and people don't talk about how good they sound anymore. Obviously, headphones are better, but if you're relying on the speakers here, you'll be pretty happy. And battery life, as of right now, has been fantastic. Apple claims the machines can get around 17 to 21 hours of battery life, which sounds awesome on paper. But if you get into any kind of intensive workflow, like editing video continuously, battery life becomes more like 4-ish hours, which is still pretty good. But if you're not doing anything super intensive and you're using Safari, the extended battery life will really show. I've tried to get into Safari. I've really made an effort. Like I want to in my heart to get into Safari. I still come back to Chrome. And Chrome is a destroyer of battery life. So probably getting about 70% of what I could get if I switch to Safari. But if you want the better battery life, then switch browsers. But if you're really inside of the Google ecosystem, you want to stick with Chrome, just know you're definitely going to take a hit on battery. So overall, this machine has been awesome. And my workflow on this has not been that intense. I've almost never heard fans. I am so thankful that the touch bar is gone. That's the big reason I went for the MacBook Air originally instead of the MacBook Pro. It seems to be a computer finally for those that want the full functionality of a laptop and the ports you would get from a desktop. I don't know why Apple removed all these. I'm certainly happy to sell you a solution to that problem, but these are the computers that pros have been wanting. And maybe I'm just in my bubble of somebody who makes content on YouTube that I think everybody's looking for the exact same thing that I am or that my friends are, and you may not. But if you're looking for a computer that's going to give you incredible battery life, that's going to give you incredible speed, incredible performance, then look no farther than the MacBook Air. But if you need a computer that's going to give you all of those things, plus a brighter screen, a better screen, a faster fingerprint reader, and also give you ports for days, then the MacBook Pro is going to be your jam. Listen, most of the things that I'm doing here is all online. I'm not doing much video editing anymore. I'm watching video, I'm sending emails, playing a little bit of games on the side. And for that, all that I really need more than specs on the computer is a consistent internet connection. So I've talked about it before. My house is a Faraday cage. I've got metal in my walls, and it's where all signals, wireless or Wi-Fi, have gone to die. So trying to get reliable Wi-Fi in my house is a problem. So enter the TP-Link Deco X90. It's from TP-Link. They've been in this industry for a while, and there's a lot of things that I've liked about this. First, it works in my house, which is awesome. I don't know what kind of magic or wizardry is going on in here. It's probably due to the tri-band technology, or maybe that it's got AI-driven mesh system with smart antennas. I don't know what it is. All I care is that it works and that my kids care that they could stream Paw Patrol, and all of that is possible. You might be thinking to yourself, John, that sounds complicated to set up. It's not. Actually, the setup is really simple and easy. There's a couple taps in the app and you are good to go. It can also potentially boost speeds from your current Wi-Fi. Get closer to what you should be getting. It can cover a much bigger house than mine. It can cover up to 6,000 square feet and connect up to 200 devices. So sure, you can, hit the link down below and learn more about it and buy it online, or you can be a little bit more modern and go through sort of Amazon's locker and have it either delivered right to your home or have it sent to one of Amazon's locker locations. There's obviously a bunch that goes into making this Wi-Fi 6 system work really well, but if it works for me, chances are it will work for you as well. But clearly, I'm not alone. The TP-Link Deco X90 also won JD Power Awards. If you do want to check it out, pick it up, buy it yourself, or have it sent to one of the Amazon lockers, all the links are down below. So that's me, somebody whose workflow is mostly online, but there are others who are doing what I'm doing, plus a lot more and a lot better. Editing videos, sort of working really heavy inside of Final Cut, or even if they're editing in Premiere Pro. And that's where someone with an M1 Max machine would want to share their experiences, especially 1 month later. So enter Robert Rosenfeld, who is the very expert host of the Apple Circle, an amazing channel that talks exclusively about Apple, and he's been rocking his M1 Max.
So I recently made the very exciting move going from Intel over to Apple Silicon, ditching my fairly spec'd out 16-inch i9 MacBook Pro and going instead with a 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro. To summarize it in a few words, consider my mind blown. The difference has been beyond night and day. This M1 Max is absolutely incredible. So to give a little context, the MacBook Pro model I had was only about a year and a half old, and it was fairly spec'd out when I got it. It was a 16-inch i9 with 32 gigs of RAM, a terabyte SSD, and then whatever the highest end GPU option was at the time. I think it was 8 gigs of video RAM, and I had all of that paired to a much larger eGPU below via Thunderbolt that had an additional AMD Radeon card inside for as much GPU processing as I could get, and it was basically taking up a lot of my desk with this MacBook Pro on top of this gigantic eGPU. It was sort of this Frankenstein monster mess that I was very happy to get rid of and go to something much simpler. Instead, these days, it's a simple 14-inch M1 Max with 32 cores, 32 gigs of unified memory, and a 1 terabyte SSD. Keeping things simple, and I love it. Now, I wish I could give you my thoughts on the all-new mini LED display or the keyboard or the great ports and all that stuff, but to be honest with you, my laptop stays in clamshell mode docked 99.9% of the time. I don't care about the display, I don't care about the keyboard. I have my own keyboard and mouse and displays to work with, and to me, all that really matters is performance, and specifically, all I care about is how fast can these Apple Silicon Macs export videos? How good can my Final Cut Pro performance be? How well can I add motion graphics and jump between Final Cut Pro and After Effects and Photoshop? That's what really is important to me, and in that respect, just speaking of pure performance, the M1 Max, just again, totally blew me away. So with simple day-to-day stuff like web browsing, watching videos, even some light photo and video work, I can never really see that the i9 MacBook Pro was slow. It never really got bogged down. But once I started to go into some more complex projects with 4.6K video, and especially with any kind of motion graphics or plugins, that's where the machine would really start to bog down, and there were a few things that I just couldn't do. The big one being that I couldn't play back Final Cut Pro video in full quality in the timeline. Seems like it's not a big deal, you can turn on better performance mode and sort of scrub through with ease, but sometimes you want to have a full quality example of what you're editing, for color correction, for looking at graphics, just to make sure you're getting the best representation of your work as possible. Just wasn't possible to do on my i9 MacBook Pro. It would stutter, frames would drop, it would just lag too much, and just wasn't even an option on that computer, so I could never do it, and I just had to sort of get over it and never turn that on. The other thing I had a lot of issues with was any kind of motion graphics. If we used any kind of motion VFX plugin, any kind of drop zones, introducing that into the project would basically bring the computer to its knees. It was just going to take some time to do exports, to do rendering. You kind of get the idea. Everything just took a little bit more time than I probably would have liked. Now, jumping to the M1 Max is where things totally got different for me. I could do everything that my MacBook Pro couldn't do before, plus so much more. So I could play back everything in full quality inside the timeline, no problem. I could scrub through and never drop frames. I didn't have to wait for footage to transcode. Everything was just butter smooth and blazing fast. And also, all the plugins that I had so many issues with on the i9 MacBook Pro just seemed to work. Even some that weren't optimized for Apple Silicon just seemed to run way better on these new M1 M1 Max chips inside of these new MacBook Pros. And best of all, those export times are absolutely bonkers. I'm sure you've heard it before, you've seen other examples, but in my personal experience, exporting a 15-minute 4K Apple Circle high-res copy that would go on YouTube would typically take anywhere from 10 to 15 or 20 minutes on the i9 MacBook Pro. On this new 14-inch M1 Max, I can do that 15-minute high-res export in under 5 minutes, and at the same time as that export's going, I can jump into Photoshop, I can jump into Google Chrome, I can jump into After Effects. I've just been incredibly impressed with the performance out of this M1 Max.
So there it is, right from Robert, somebody who's editing and creating 8 to 10 videos per month, makes their living based on their computer, and could have purchased whatever computer they wanted to use, chose the 14-inch Max, and did not opt for the 16-inch Max with a little extra sustained power. And I think that's a testament to how powerful these computers are. And in fact, if you benchmark them and compare them to Apple's Mac Pro that they were selling last year for 10, 20, 30, 40 and up thousands of dollars, despite these laptops seeming expensive, there's actually a value proposition here. They're getting a machine that can hold its own against computers that cost 3, 4, 5 times as much, and then you can take them anywhere with you on top of that. That is amazing. And I think that's a testament to what Apple has done with their silicon on the original M1 chip to what we have right now. And this is still kind of Apple's freshman effort. There's still just variances of that M1 chip. And I'm tough on Apple for a lot of things, but I think I'm also want to give credit where it's due. And the fact that these chips have made almost everybody forget about Intel is mind-blowing for a company to come in this late into sort of their life cycle, make their own silicon, change what it's based on, make ARM-based chips, and have them perform that well. The processors are that good. Apple's Rosetta emulation for x86 is that good. You won't have any idea what you're on or what the code was written for. Things work that well. And the big question here is just, what machine do you want? What pool do you want to live in? Are you okay with 8 cores? Do you want extra headroom with 10 cores? Do you want the absolute bonkers machine to do everything? Apple has given you a choice. And these are not cheap machines. They are not inexpensive machines. But if you make your living, you put food on your table from any of these, there's a lot of value to be had. You should be jazzed, excited, pumped, and probably already have one in your bag, because the improvements from last year and the improvements with the Intel machines are that drastic that these MacBook Pros are an absolute home run for Apple. And the big question you gotta ask yourself about this whole thing is, do you need one? And if the answer is yes, you will not be disappointed. If the answer is maybe, go for the MacBook Air. You will love it, and just get yourself a couple extra dongles, and I think you'll be pretty happy with your new computer. So a big thank you again to TP-Link for sponsoring this video. If you want to pick up and buy the Deco X90, hit the link down below in the description.